Hello, my name is Alberto, and welcome to this completion seminar that is actually being recorded 1 week after the actual completion seminar. Today I will be presenting my PhD thesis, which is named Multiscale Simulation of Wildfire Spotting, and that was supervised by Dr. Jean-Baptiste Filippi, Dr. Alexander Filkov, and Dr. Jane Cawson. I'll shortly start with a general introduction to the topic and what are the main motivation, context, and aims of this thesis. We will then dive into the main work that has been done during this PhD thesis, and when we'll have a short summary and some perspectives, and we won't have questions because this is being recorded offline. So you might already know that the spotting actually is the spread of fire ahead of the fire front due to firebrands. Firebrands are small pieces of vegetation that you see here in this picture that are coming from the bark or from twigs. They are coming in different sizes, shapes, etc. And so spotting is comprising the generation of firebrands, the transport at different distances, and also the possible ignition of the fuel bed once the firebrand is landing onto the fuel bed. It is quite a complex problem, sorry, because it is a mixture of physical phenomena happening with the fuel. So you have um, species of vegetation that are going to produce more firebrands than others in different sizes and different shapes. The intensity of the fire is also going to be linked to more intense spotting activity. Of course, the atmosphere, if you have a very well developed convective column, it will increase the spotting distance as well. And of course, the interaction with topography also plays a major role, sorry, into the spotting phenomena. We usually tend to categorize spotting into different ranges. Just to simplify, we will talk here about the short distance spotting. It is something that is composed of a lot of different firebrands, very small, that are traveling mainly with the wind. And in some cases, it can become a very intense phenomena with thousands of small firebrands or embers as well, in a phenomena called ember shower or ember storms. And so when you try to model this, you need to take mainly into account the wildland urban interface modeling scale, let's say. So this short distance is from some meters up to 1 kilometer. When spotting is happening at distances greater than 1 kilometer, we speak about medium or long range spotting. And this is what you see here as well. So you have a very well developed convective column, and at some point you will see a zoom in and smoke coming out of the ground. So this is most likely due to firebrand that has landed that has reignited the fuel bed. And of course, when you try to model these phenomena and these distances, you need to take into account as well the atmosphere, and the scales are a little bit larger. So as we have seen, spotting is a phenomena that is complicating wildfire control strategies and is one of the main causes of habitat loss during wildfires. It is actually one of the missing processes in coupled fire atmosphere models, which are frameworks or methods that help us to resolve at the same time the weather and also the fire coupling in a way that has been designed to be faster than real time. So that is that they can provide results faster than the actual fire progression. And so the context of this thesis is that it was organized as a joint PhD between the CNRS and the University of Melbourne. And this joint PhD program was named Multiscale Experimentation and Simulation of Wildfire Spotting. And it was conducted in 2 fire-prone regions, Australia and Corsica, and it was mixing experimental and numerical approaches. So the main objective of this thesis is that we need to find the potential spotting areas faster than real time. And so because with coupled fire atmosphere models, we're able to resolve the atmospheric phenomena, and also the fire progression. The main objective of this thesis is to implement the spotting into a coupled fire atmosphere model. So we have derived this main or overarching objective into 3 smaller ones. The first one will be to analyze and compare existing and current models to describe firebrands. The second one will be to propose a reduced firebrand transport model. And finally, we will implement the numerical method to include the spotting into the coupled fire atmosphere model. So the first part, we take a look at the different models that have been used to describe firebrand. And so it's actually in the 60s that we have been able to obtain the first simplified trajectories of firebrands. And later on, and more recently as well, with the usage of computational fluid dynamics and large eddy simulation techniques that provide a wind flow that can be used with Lagrangian models to describe firebrands, we have been able to understand the importance of turbulence and also the vertical terminal velocity of the firebrands to understand their trajectories. However, there was still some knowledge gap regarding the influence of drag and combustion models on the final travel distance of firebrands. So what we have done in this first part, is to use Meson H and Forfire, which is a coupled fire atmosphere model, to obtain realistic wind flows. Once we have obtained a realistic wind flow describing the plume of the fire and the actual atmospheric circulations, we're able to calculate the firebrand trajectories in the obtained 3D field. To do so, we assume that the firebrands are modeled as point mass particles with two idealized shapes, either cylinders or disk. And so the firebrands that we simulate are going to have different initial conditions, such as different initial density, radius, height, also position and velocity, of course. And the main comparison that we're going to do is through the ground landing distributions of the firebrands. And we have done this in an open source approach. So we have published the code that was used to make these calculations and also the dataset that was published along the paper that we'll just talk about. So the method, how it works, is that we have Forfire, which is the fire propagation model. It is going to provide heat flux and vapor flux to Meson H. And as a response to this perturbation, the atmospheric model is going to, of course, calculate the corresponding wind field, pressure field, and temperature field. And so on the right here, you see an animation of what an actual fire plume looks like simulated with Meson H Forfire. And so this is the 3D field that we're going to use to then propagate and calculate the firebrand trajectories. So we have used a number of models that were used in the literature actually, different models that describe the aerodynamic, but also the mass loss of the combustion. And this has been published in a paper some months ago. So when we take a look at the results without combustion, so we only take a look at the aerodynamic effect. Here I'm showing the amount of firebrands that are landed on the ground, so a top view. And so this is for cylinders, and this is for disk. And so when we compare all the models, we observe that cylinders are traveling less distance than disk. So this is something that was more or less known before, actually, and we have verified as well with this coupled fire atmosphere model. And we observe some differences between the different models and the results that they produce. What is more interesting as well is that when we include the mass loss of the firebrands, for the cylinders, we observe that all cylinders are going to travel very short distances, so up to 500 meters, and we only observe a long-range behavior with disk, so with disk-shaped firebrands. But of course, we also observe some very marked differences. So this is both disk firebrands, so results for firebrands with a disk shape, using different aerodynamic and combustion models. And so you see that there's some differences in terms of the ground landing distributions obtained with two different models. When we plot, for example, the longitudinal landing distance, so that is the travel distance of the firebrand versus the initial density times the initial thickness times the initial radius of the firebrand, we observe this kind of bimodal distribution where there is a threshold values here at 0.14, where initial values greater than this are going to all travel in a short range behavior, so less than 500 meters, less than 1000 meters. And below this value, actually, the firebrands are either going to travel short distances or they are going to travel long distance. And so mainly the trajectories are going to depend on the firebrand inertia, so that is something proportional to the mass and the size of the firebrand, which is indicating us how much it resists to the changes in the wind flow, but also at which time scales, meaning what is the time that the firebrand takes to adapt to the local wind flow conditions. But also it depends on the wind flow condition. If the firebrand is going to be caught in an updraft, it is going to be lifted and going to be travel faster. And so as well, the turbulence plays an important role because it's going to spread the firebrands laterally. So in this first part, we have been able to compare different drag models, different combustion models. We have provided as well the code to perform the simulations. And we have observed that the long-range behavior is best reproduced with these two models, aerodynamic and combustion models. However, an important thing to note is that these kind of simulations where we have around 60,000 particles takes us around 10 hours. So moving to the second part, I have just said that it takes a long time to calculate these trajectories. Is mainly because they require a very small time step, so around 0.01 seconds, to calculate the trajectory and to have a stable numerical scheme. So as well, we need to do a careful selection of the aerodynamic and combustion models that are used to obtain long-range behavior. So the idea is that there is a need to have a different formulation for the firebrand transport and to provide a different model that is most adapted to coupled fire atmosphere models. Sorry. So the method we're going to follow is to compare the previous complex model that I have just presented to a new reduced one, so a new simplified model that I will present in a few minutes. We're going to still use MesonH for fire to obtain realistic wind flows, and in this case we're going to compare the models across different topographies. So we chose an idealized flat terrain and an idealized hill terrain, and as you see, the differences in terms of plume shape, but also plume height and different ground wind values are quite evident from the simulation. So if we test the models in different configurations, we're also more certain of its ability to generalize across different wind flow conditions. So the proposed model that was presented actually that was published in a paper some weeks ago, sorry, is that instead of calculating the accelerations as we did before with the forces exerted on the firebrand, we're going to directly calculate the firebrand velocities. So to do so, we link the firebrand velocities to another component. So in this case of the vertical velocity of the firebrand, it is going to be set to the vertical velocity of the wind flow minus the terminal vertical velocity of the firebrand itself. And for the horizontal components, the horizontal velocity of the firebrand is going to be equal to the horizontal velocity of the wind flow field plus a turbulent contribution that is actually updated every tau over 10 seconds. And so this tau given here is the characteristic translation time of the firebrand, so an indication of how much time it takes to adapt to the local wind flow conditions. And of course, we simulate the firebrands until they have landed on the ground or until they have exceeded a flight time greater than the maximum time of flight that is provided by experimental data. And so when we compare the ground landing densities for the complex model in orange and the reduced model in black gray lines for the flat and for the hill terrain, we observed that the reduced model is matching generally the same shape as the complex one. In the case of the flat terrain, it is following this narrow column and then the spread as the plume grows as well. And in the case of the hill, the reduced model is capturing this kind of dynamic effect where the firebrands are deflected to the right. And so when we calculate different numerical scores, we are able to conclude that the reduced model provides similar shapes at scales of around 250 meters, is able to do so at across different wind flows, so different topographies. And of course, the interesting part is that the time step of the reduced model is around 1 second, so that is 100 times greater than the time step that was required to be used in the complex model. So just to show you what it looks like, here is an animation with a plume in gray. This is the complex model and this is the reduced model. And so when we visualize them dynamically, we see that the reduced model is showing the same kind of behavior with the firebrands that are caught in this updraft, and so they are going to be traveling longer distances as well, or firebrands that are not really caught in this updraft and they are going to travel shorter distances as well. And we observe that the general shape at the ground is similar for the reduced model than for the reference model. So we show that it is able to provide useful informations with an increased time step as well. However, we have seen that we need to have a way to estimate the firebrand's time of life. So that is the amount of time that the firebrands remain airborne, or that remain airborne actually. And so there was some missing data regarding Eucalyptus obliqua, because this is a very common species in Victoria that is well known for its spotting potential. And so, as I was saying, there is a knowledge gap regarding the large size firebrands and whether they're able to sustain combustion for longer. So what we did with the CSIRO in Canberra was to use the vertical wind tunnel that you see here in this video with firebrands to test and to analyze the combustion behavior. So the protocol that we follow is to manufacture different firebrands in 3 different sizes, 10, 15, and 20 centimeters. We will then dry them in the oven for 24 hours at 105 degrees. The day after, we will ignite them at either one end or across the whole surface. One end is what you see here, what you see here in the top, where firebrands are already ignited at one end, and across the whole surface is across the whole surface of the firebrand, of course. Once they were ignited, we will introduce them in the wind tunnel, and then we were able to measure combustion times and the mass at burnout. So when we plot, for example, the flame out time versus the different size or the ignition method, we observe that the flame out time, which is the flaming duration, so that is the duration that the firebrand is able to sustain a flaming combustion with visible flames, does not really depend on the size or the ignition technique, which is something that was a little bit unexpected as well, because we thought that the size was going to influence the flaming time of the firebrands. However, an interesting thing is that the mass ratio, so the final mass of the firebrand over the initial mass of the firebrand, does depend heavily on the size, on the ignition technique, And actually the technique that is ignited at one end is producing firebrands with a greater mass ratio, indicating that the firebrands are less fragile as well. And so, as well, we were able to obtain combustion times, meaning flame out plus smoldering time, so the total combustion times, and the maximum combustion time that we measured was 438 seconds, which is coherent with previous literature on this type of firebrands. But it's also providing us with some data to inform our reduced model. Another interesting thing that we observe is reflaming. So that is that the firebrand is at some point in a smoldering combustion, so there is no visible flames. And the firebrand that you see here, at some point it will start to catch like an equilibrium, sort of. So there is a lot of oxygen reaching in the bottom part. There is a lot of smoke generated right now, and at some point the flames will start to reappear. So this is what we call reflaming. There you go. So there's a heavy flames on the firebrand. And so that's something that was observed for around 25% of the sample. So that's something that can also increase the overall hazard and the probability of ignition once the firebrand lands on the fuel bed. So we have tested the Eucalyptus obliqua firebrands that they seem to have a maximum combustion times. They are not really likely for long-range spotting or very long-range spotting greater than 10 kilometers, because the firebrands are very fragile and they do not sustain combustion very well. However, by measuring these combustion times, we're able to inform as well the reduced model, which we have shown to reproduce similar ground landing distributions compared to previous complex models. An interesting thing is that it can be solved with a time step of around 1 second, and as I said, it's based on experimental data. So now moving to the third part, where we implement the spotting parameterization into a coupled fire atmosphere framework. We have just introduced the reduced firebrand transport model, but we'll need still to develop the numerical method actually to solve this model. And the constraints that we are facing is that it should be faster than the real-time fire progression, so that the spotting is calculated simultaneously as well to the fire spread and to the atmospheric flow. and it should be able to provide us information, useful information to locate and identify potential spotting areas or areas where spotting could happen actually. So the method that we're going to follow is pretty similar to the previous one, is that we're still going to use Meson H4Fire to obtain realistic wind flows. And in this case, we're going to compare the new implemented method across two idealized terrains, and with a realistic simulation of the Mount Bolton wildfire that happened in 2016 near Ballarat. Sorry. The method that we propose is to have an Eulerian approach that instead of calculating individual trajectories of particles, we're going to calculate the transport of a firebrand mass concentration. So this is what you see in this video here, individual firebrands, and overall the Eulerian approach reproduces the general behavior of the firebrands as well. The injection is going to be parameterized as a constant firebrand mass flux originating from the ground cell of the atmospheric model. Firebrand mass is going to be transported using the diffusion advection equation, and the terminal velocity is going to be used to make the firebrands fall towards the ground. And the ignition is something that I will present in the perspectives because we're still working on that. So when we compare the Eulerian approach, Eulerian results, here in the black-gray contours with the Lagrangian previous models, we see that the Eulerian model is able to reproduce actually the behavior with the same maximum travel distance and also the general shape of the firebrands. And in the case, this was for the flat terrain, and in the case of the hill terrain, we see that the Eulerian model is also able to match this increased travel distance and also the general increase and deflection to the right with the hill flow. And so the reduced model, the Eulerian model, is providing similar shapes across different topographies. However, we see that we're missing the fine details, so we're not going to be able to resolve something under 200 to 400 meters. And so just to show you what it looks like, here I have a short animation. In gray is the smoke, so this is something that is acting as a passive tracer, it will just follow the wind. Then we have in pink the actual firebrand mass concentration field, and then in green we have the small firebrand, the firebrands in a Lagrangian perspectives. And so we see that the pink, the firebrand mass concentration is following as well the individual trajectories, and then the smoke is just being affected with the wind flow. And so moving to the realistic case, we're going to speak about the Mount Bolton wildfire, which happened in 2016. And this is part of a collaboration with the University of Queensland and the Country Fire Authority that have participated in the measurement of this wildfire. So it's a wildfire that is spread across different fuels, so tree cover and also grass, that shows some extreme fire behavior with tree torching and some tree crowning, sorry. And the interesting part is that the CFA were able to geolocate and timestamp the spot fires, so we're able to know when and where they happen, more with some precision, with some errors, of course, because we cannot be super precise about the timing, in particular of the spot fires. And the idea that we're trying to do is to reproduce this case using Meson H4Fire. And so this is the comparison of the simulated fire progression in red, sorry. That would be appearing here, and in blue is the observed fire contours. So you see that at the beginning the simulation is not really reproducing well the initial behavior of the fire. In blue, it is actually accelerating a little bit towards the southeast. Now there is some spot fires. You see here in yellow. The fire is actually accelerating mainly as well because of these spot fires that were happening. And it's interesting because if you don't have degree ignition as parameterized in the coupled fire atmosphere model, you won't be able to capture this acceleration of the fire front due to the spot fires. Still, our simulation is a little bit towards the west. Now the wind is starting to shift. Some more spot fires happening here. The actual fire progression is still now going to the east. Now our simulation is following it. It has followed the wind shift, and the spot fires have been declared in this, let's say, this part of the of the region. And so more or less the simulation is running a little bit behind the observed contours, but it's not a big deal, let's say, because more or less the main steps in the fire are well reproduced. So that is, the fire progressed towards the south and then it shifted towards the east. So it's still giving us interesting information about the fire progression and how it is linked with the wind behavior. And so now what we're going to show is the the spot concentration in a slice that is following actually the measurements from a portable radar that was deployed to the field and was measuring actually the plume properties. And in pink is the actual spot concentration, but in a 3D manner. So I will just move the video a little bit because we still don't have any radar data. Yep. Okay, so now you saw as well the liquid water that is calculated by the atmospheric model. An interesting part, yeah, is starting right now here. So now we have radar data that was measured by the portable radar that is located here actually. And you see in the simulation in blue the liquid water contents, pink is the spot, the firebrand mass concentration field, and this is just a slice of the simulation. And you see that the simulation right now is starting to get more convective. The plume is developing. Firebrand mass is going to achieve higher distances as well. And if I pause it here, you see that the distances, the height, sorry, are roughly around 5,000 in the simulation, and similarly 5,000 to 6,000 meters in the observations. And also an interesting part is that when you look at the big structures, you see that they are traveling at the same speed. So that is something that is quite interesting for us because we're able to show that the atmospheric model reproduces well the dynamics and the general atmospheric circulations. But it's just to show you that we can verify the simulation by showing that the plume height is similar to the observed one, and also that the general dynamic of the structures are coherent between the simulation and the observations as well. And so, of course, when we calculate the firebrand mass field trajectory, we're also able to show to calculate, sorry, where it is going to be deposited. And so here we're showing the 30 minutes accumulated firebrand mass on the ground. So we see at the beginning of the simulation, the deposited mass is going towards the south. At some point, that's what we saw in the first video, it is going to shift, sorry, a little bit to the right. And this is where we start to observe the first reported spot fires by the CFA teams. So you actually see that the reported spot fires are lying in the same areas actually as the prediction of the model. When we move forward, still there is some other fires that are detected here, and they are completely within the predicted the predicted region. Sorry. Now we're going to see as well the shift towards the east, some other spot fires happening, and in this case there is an intense convection activity which is leading to an increase in spotting distance. And actually very interesting is that there was a spot fire reported here, and that is lying very close to this region that was detected by the model. And so when we show the dynamics of the phenomena, you see in dots the dynamic field, and in pink the 30-minute accumulated field. And so you see that the accumulated field actually is well reproducing the dynamics of the spot fire, um, indicating that this is a region where firebrands, where spotting could happen actually, because there is a lot of mass being deposited. Now we see that the fire is starting to shift a little bit towards the right, towards the east. The convective activity is decreasing, and so the potential spotting areas now it is increasing a little bit. There's more spot fires happening. The the wind shift is starting to be finalizing and being completed towards the east. Now there is an increased spotting activity, which is leading to this increased potential spotting area, and you see this small region actually that was detected by the model, and that was predicting a spot fire that was happening just here as well. So of course, this dynamic visualization is giving us a lot of detail, but it's mainly showing us that there was a high risk for having spot fires in this direction and then this direction as well. So that's something that can be very useful, particularly because the Eulerian model seems to be very well adapted. It can be executed online or simultaneously to the atmospheric and the fire progression. It seems to be able to predict the temporal and spatial dynamics, and of course it's offering a lot of information that compared to Gaussian models, the amount of information and dynamics are greater as well. And the interesting part, of course, that the forecast is provided faster than real time. So it took us 2 hours to produce an 8-hour fire forecast. So that meaning that in 2 hours we have produced the simulation. I mean, it takes 2 hours to run the simulation that will provide 8 hours of actual fire progression. That is able to identify the potential spotting areas and also the spotting densities. So that could be linked actually to the probability of spot fires. So as a short summary of this presentation, we have compared existing aerodynamic and combustion models. We have developed a reduced firebrand transport model, and we have implemented a numerical method to include the spotting into a coupled fire atmosphere model. And of course, the main thing that can be interesting is the forecast of spotting is happening faster than real time. We're able to determine the potential spotting areas that can be of interest for the operational fire management teams. The perspective is, of course, to increase the number of verification cases to be sure that there are no bias in the model, and that can provide useful information across different vegetations, across different weather conditions, etc. And the last things that we're working on is the ignition of the fuel bed. So in this case, you see 4 simulations of the same exact atmospheric initial conditions, but with ignition that is stochastic, so that it depends on the deposited firebrand mass, but also on a certain probability. And so you see that at the beginning, the fire progression is similar across all the models, but when you start to have a spotting here in green, the general dynamics of the flow start to change. At some point, there is pyroconvection that is triggered here, and so the fire is progressing faster as well. And so by running these kind of ensemble simulations, we can also get more information about what will be the average behavior of the fire. So just a quick word about the acknowledgements. Of course, the University of Melbourne and the CNRS, which have provided funding for this PhD and resources, at the FLIR Wildfire Research Group, and at the Université de Corse, and all the labs where we have conducted research, so the LARO in Toulouse, CSIRO in Canberra, University of Queensland in Brisbane, sorry, and the Country Fire Authority that provided very useful data. So that was all for me. I hope that you have enjoyed this seminar, and please, if you have any questions, just drop me an email or drop a comment on the video. Many thanks. See you.